What is going on, Colts Nation? Welcome back to another episode of Bring the Juice. Your guy, Cody here. Also joining me, Andrew Thomason, once again. Andrew, it's a long off season, man. Couple months still till free agency. Couple more months till the draft. A lot going on. Actually, not a lot going on right now. A lot of speculation going on around all the different things regarding the Indianapolis Colts right now. And so I thought it'd be probably good to talk about 5 moves that we feel like the Indianapolis Colts should make. Now, we're not saying specific players. We're more talking about specific moves the Colts should make. We'll mention a few players along the way, but we think there's 5 positions or maybe a few more that you would say the Colts need to potentially address. But we're going to say these are the top 5 for us here in this video. So let's start here with the first one here. The way we're going to go about it, we'll start with the offense, go to the defense. We got 3 on the offense, 2 on the defense. We'll start with the first position on offense here. I think you got to address wide receiver. I think you have to make some moves at wide receiver. I think personally, Andrew, you got to make some moves, not just one, but multiple moves. You got to go dip into free agency and potentially even the draft. What are your thoughts on the wide receiver position and this move the Colts should make, or moves the Colts should make?
Well, I agree. I think it's got to be more than one. I think you have to, like you said, dip into free agency and then dip in the draft. The Colts were the only team this year, Cody, to not have multiple receivers surpass the 500-yard receiving mark. Michael Pittman Jr., who had a breakout year, has proven to be their wide receiver one going forward, was the only receiver to surpass 500 yards, receiving yards this past season. No other Colts receiver did. Every other team in the NFL, all 31 other teams, as bad as Houston's receiving core is, as bad as Detroit's is, as bad as Jacksonville's maybe is, they all surpassed or had multiple receivers go reach over the 500-yard mark. And it was a problem for the Colts. I mean, listen, it's been a problem for the last couple of off seasons. We've talked about it before. This lack of willing to spend in free agency on Chris Ballard's part has come back to haunt this team. And when you look at the receiver position specifically, the teams that the Colts were playing, what they started to do is they said, okay, well, we're just going to double Pittman. We're going to bracket him. And then we're going to make one of the other receivers, be it Ashton Dulin, Zach Pascal, T.Y. Hilton, who, although he's had a really good, 10-year plus career with Indianapolis, is kind of on the downcline of his career, pardon me. That's why he's mulling retirement. However, they couldn't do it. The other receivers, they had their moments. Ashton Dulin had a couple touchdowns. Zach Pascal had a couple touchdowns. But they certainly didn't play to the level that the Colts needed them to play at. And this is now the NFL, Tom Brady's retirement, Big Ben's retirement, both Manning's retired within the last 4 or 5 years. There, a lot of these quarterbacks that are like statues in the pocket, if you will, that no longer exists to a degree. Quarterbacks now are mobile. They can get out. They can make plays off script. So you have to be able to have the weapons that can complement that type of quarterback play. And the Colts don't have that. They absolutely need to go out. I mean, you look at guys like Chris Godwin, Devontae Adams, Michael Gallup. I mean, those are just a few to name that could potentially hit free agency. You look at the receivers in the draft. The one name that comes to my mind is David Bell. Stud for Purdue, multiple 200-plus yard receiving games. Had that really good game. I think it was against Iowa, maybe either this past season or the season before. We know how electrifying he is. I know certainly Purdue fans know how explosive he is at that position. And so, I mean, those are certainly some names to think of if you're the Colts. And I think that at the very least, they need to do more than just throw out an offer. They need to be willing to adapt, change along with the NFL, maybe spend a little bit more money, and go get Carson Wentz or whomever the quarterback may be more weapons for the 2022 season.
I mean, I'm just looking, man, at this free agency class here potentially. There are so many guys that I would love for the Colts to invest in. You mentioned a couple. You got Allen Robinson, Chris Godwin, Devontae Adams, even though he's probably going to be super expensive. You got guys like I know some people don't like Juju, but he's available. You got guys like Michael Williams from the Chargers who potentially will become available. Even guys like Christian Kirk, So you got different levels of guys, but all still really, really good receivers. It's almost like you would almost have to be crazy to not sign one of these guys, for how deep this class is, not just in free agency, but also in the draft. I think you have to come away with multiple, guys here in this position because, like it's so deep, you're probably going to get a guy that originally would ask for either a lot more money in free agency or would go a lot higher in the draft because of how crowded this room is. Kind of similar to that 2020 draft when Michael Pittman Jr. fell all the way to the Colts, where he probably in the next year's class, he could have been a first round pick potentially. So I kind of look at it like that. Like you got to kind of take advantage of that, of how many guys there are potentially that are going to become available. And you're right, you need to give your quarterback weapons to get a true fair evaluation on your future at quarterback. So 100% agree with you there. Let's move to a position that's very similar, but obviously a little bit different. On the offense, the tight end position, another skilled position that probably needs an upgrade somewhere, somehow. Now, there are a couple guys, and I think for me personally, Andrew, I'd rather look free agency than go in the draft because you already just drafted a guy in Kylan Granson last year in the 4th round. So there's a couple guys that kind of come to mind here. You got guys like Zach Ertz, who's a little bit older. You got guys like Gerald Everett. You got guys like Robert Tonyan. You got guys like Dalton Schultz. You got guys like Mike Gesicki. That's 5 guys right there. There's more guys as well that are going to be in the market. So it seems like maybe not as deep as wide receiver, but certainly a deep group here in terms of free agency.
Oh, without question. And I think that is something the Colts have to take into consideration. Like with wide receiver, they have to be able to say, okay, here's our weakness. And of course, Ballard even mentioned it in his season-ending presser. He identified tight end to a degree as a weakness. Now you have to do more than just talk about it. Now you have to show what you're willing to do to upgrade that position. Molly Cox is a nice tight end. Dropped some key passes in the red zone this past season. Jack Doyle is considering retirement. Kylan Granson, didn't really see enough from him. You certainly can't go into this next season if they were to not, in fact, re-sign Moali Cox with just Kylan Granson, or I'd argue even both Moali Cox and Kylan Granson on this team. You need somebody and Colts fans, I know this, I guess, who knows what happened with Eric Ebron. However Colts fans feel about that situation is beside the point. The fact of the matter is he came in and had 13 touchdowns in one season and was a huge part of Frank Reich's offense. And the Colts need to get back to having that playmaker over the top that can create chunk plays for this team. I remember we got to interview Kylan Granson. That was one of the questions that I had asked him. Do you feel like you're a guy that can come in and create chunk plays for this team and for this offense? And while he didn't really get a ton of opportunities as a rookie, I think that can maybe change this offseason, or this next season, pardon me. But this offseason, I think it's important for the Colts to emphasize they need more help at the tight end position, without question.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. They need something. They need a guy that can just, like you said, create mismatches out there. I mean, Kylan Granson very well may be that guy, but he was still a rookie, right? He's still learning. He's still growing. He's coming from a program like SMU that's not, it's going to take a little bit of time to get fully acclimated to the NFL level. So I don't see an issue with having multiple receiving tight ends myself personally, because, you even look at Carson Wentz. If we want to stick with Carson Wentz, you look at the year that they went to the Super Bowl. Look at his tight ends. He had multiple really, really good tight ends on that team, and it worked in his favor. It worked in the Eagles' favor. So why not give him more receiving options than less? I guess that's kind of where I'm at.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And again, we've briefly touched on this, whether it's Carson Wentz or it's somebody else. Look at some of these other quarterbacks in the NFL, Cody. For example, Aaron Rodgers. Robert Tonyan goes down. They don't have a succession plan. I shouldn't say succession plan. They don't have a quality backup to turn to when Tonyan went down. Allen Lazard is a nice wide receiver too. Equinemius St. Brown is maybe a wide receiver 3 or wide receiver 4. But like we were talking about earlier with the receivers for the Colts, I think teams started to realize that the only receiver that really scares opposing defenses for Green Bay was Davante Adams, and we kind of saw that in the divisional round. They took away Davante Adams, and they said, okay, I want to see Allen Lazard. I want to see St. Brown. I know MVS, Marquez Valdez-Scantling, was out for that game. But even still, my point being is that even a quarterback that's as elite and exceptional as Aaron Rodgers, I mean, goodness, he's going to win a second MVP more than likely in a row. Even he has to have requisite weapons to match his talent. And that, I think, just speaks volumes to what the Colts need to do at that tight end position. And not just the tight end, but as we mentioned earlier, the receiving position, just weapons in general. It's vital. It's crucial, especially in today's pass-heavy NFL.
Yeah, I mean, I know this year's a little bit of an outlier, but you see the last couple Super Bowls that teams have been in, there's been a common denominator, Andrew. At least one of those teams has had a really, really good tight end, what we would consider an elite tight end. Like they've had a guy that, they've had the Kelseys, they've had the Kittles, they've had, insert whoever. There's been a lot of really, really good tight ends that have really helped these offenses that maybe don't have, necessarily like, you look at the 49ers. They don't have an Aaron Rodgers type of quarterback. They have Jimmy G. But the fact that George Kittle has been able to do what he's done there and really get them to, 2 conference championships in a matter of only a couple of years. Obviously, there's other factors as well, but I think having a big tight end and a good tight end that you can rely on, that's one of those guys, I think is very underrated in today's NFL, but I think it's so crucial in today's NFL as well.
Well, absolutely. And there's another guy that goes by the name of Deebo Samuel. He's pretty good at football too.
Yeah,
That certainly helps, especially when you have a quarterback like you mentioned, Jimmy G, who's good, not great, certainly not classified in that elite category with your Josh Allens and your Justin Herberts and your Patrick Mahomes and your Joe Burrows and Matt Staffords and so on and so forth, right? But again, there's a blueprint, Cody. It's out there. It's like staring the Colts in the face. It's like, hey, hello, hi. Like, go get a receiver. Go get a tight end. Go get more weapons along the perimeter. I mean, my goodness, how many different ways did the 49ers use Deebo Samuel, motioning him in the backfield, using him as a running back, quick screens, orbit motions, jet sweeps. I mean, you name it. He was utilized in such a variety of ways. He's such a dynamic, versatile weapon for them, and it makes all the difference. I mean, it was a 3-point game or a 3-point win for the Rams. This wasn't a blowout on the Rams' part by any means, and that's a credit and a testament to the amount of weapons that they have. Jawan Jennings came on as of late, but Deebo Samuel and George Kittle, once they got back and once they started remaining healthy, the 49ers went on a run. We saw that they started maybe a little bit similar to how the Colts did record-wise. They were in that 3-4, 3-5 range. I think the Colts, like the Colts were at one point, or maybe not exactly, but you get the idea. They had similar records, and that was because they weren't healthy in those areas. But when those receivers came back, Kittle, Samuel, it made all the difference. They went on a run. We saw what they did in the playoffs, how big of a difference it makes. And if you're the Colts, I mean, even if you stick with the Carson Wentz, who isn't an elite quarterback, but has got a ceiling, you need to surround him with better pieces.
100%, 100%. All right, and also you need to protect him, which we'll talk about here now. We'll transition to left tackle. Eric Fisher was an unmitigated disaster last year in terms of pass protection. Let's just call it what it is. Eric Fisher was not great coming off that Achilles injury. He really struggled and honestly, cost the Colts potentially some games. If you look at it from a momentum standpoint, what sticks in my mind, Andrew, is that Tampa Bay game when, the Colts are going to march down and potentially kind of put that game on ice there in that third quarter. What happened? Shaq Barrett gets around Eric Fisher, strip sacks Carson Wentz, changes the entire trajectory of that game. The Colts end up losing that game. So I think left tackle is certainly an important position. Now, there's a few guys here that are of interest. The one that has been floating around Colts Nation, which I don't know how likely it is because he's going to command a lot of money, is Terron Armstead. I mean, the tackle for the Saints. A little bit older. He's in his 30s, but he's still one of the best tackles in football. There's some other names as well who we'll get into. What are your thoughts, though, on this tackle position, the left tackle?
Well, my first thought is when can they induct Anthony Costanzo into the Ring of Honor? Because my goodness, Eric Fisher as a pass protector, it's like I mean, listen to all the people that are listening to this. I am 5'8", 170 pounds, and I could pass protect better than Eric Fisher at times. Okay, I mean, not really, but you get the idea. He was bad. Bad. There's no other way to put it. Now, as a run blocker, I will say, phenomenal. He posted his highest run blocking grade according to Pro Football Focus since 2014. On the flip side, he posted his lowest pass blocking grade since 2014. So there's two sides to that, right? And what's so just concerning is I mean, I guess if you're the Colts, you have to address. I mean, it was a 1 year deal. The Colts had an opportunity, I think, to get Charles Leno, who went in and played for Washington, and played particularly well for them. And you wonder if maybe they took Leno over Fisher, or they elected to sign him over Fisher, if things would have been different, if they maybe aren't having this conversation. But it just goes to show you that, number one, left tackles are hard to come by. Franchise left tackles at that are hard to come by. And I think Colts fans, got a real solid sense of just how great Anthony Costanzo was in his prime, both as a pass blocker and as a run blocker as well. Now, you also mentioned there are some intriguing names that come to mind. For me, one of those names is Trent Brown, left tackle for the New England Patriots. Well, he played right tackle this past year, but when he was with New England and with the Las Vegas Raiders in 2018 and 2019, he played left tackle. So he's 28 years old, coming off of a contract year with New England. He was traded from Vegas to New England, back to New England. So he's played in New England 2 out of the last 3 years, has been exceptional for them. And if New England decides to let him walk, you know, the Colts have to at least look into that, right? I mean, I'm not saying go hand him a blank check and give him whatever he wants, but he's a young tackle. He is 6'8", 310, 15 pounds. He is an absolute monster, an exceptional pass blocker, a really good run blocker. And at 28 years old, I think he potentially solves your issue at left tackle for at least the next 4 or 5 years. And, I mean, you've got all the other pieces in place along that offensive line. Now you need a left tackle that's arguably the most important. Most quarterbacks are right-handed, and obviously that's the blind side of most quarterbacks. You have to have somebody in there who has stability and can play well enough and play at an elite level from that left tackle position. Eric Fisher, yes, he was coming off of an Achilles tear, and obviously there were some question marks going into that signing. We now know that maybe wasn't the best. You mentioned that Tampa Bay game. I'll also mention the Baltimore game where they're driving, and Oweh, the rookie, I can't remember his first name, for the Ravens, exactly what Shaq Barrett did, went right around Eric Fisher and got to Carson Wentz, strip set Carson Wentz in the red zone. Baltimore recovers, completely shifts the momentum. Baltimore goes down and scores. I mean, that left tackle is that important. I mean, there's a reason that there's so many general managers and journalists and media members that say top 3 needs of an NFL franchise are quarterback, left tackle, and pass rusher in no particular order. But some people would argue that left tackle is number 1. And I mean, I can't sit here and say that I necessarily disagree. Left tackle is important, vital, crucial, however you want to say it. And the Colts need an upgrade, and they need an upgrade soon, because Eric Fisher simply was not good enough.
Yeah, another guy that interests me is Cam Robinson. He played with the Jacksonville Jaguars. He's probably the youngest guy here that could potentially become available. I mean, he's only 26 years old, so he's still, fairly young in his prime. He actually played pretty decent last year with the Jaguars. I know he's had some different concerns as well, just with injuries and stuff like that over the years, but he's a former second-round pick, so he's got the talent. He's 6'6", 320 pounds, so he's got the size as well. He's probably the sleeper guy that I'm looking at potentially. The Colts could sign for a couple of years. He's young, and at the very least, he's a serviceable backup if it comes to the worst. But, still, I think you got to kind of figure it out, and he might not be that expensive considering how much maybe Armstead's going to attract attention, and maybe it'll take the attention away from a guy like Robinson.
Yeah, Cam Robinson is certainly interesting. As you mentioned, second-round pick out of Alabama, has had his moments, up and downs. I think he's had some injury issues, but he is intriguing. And you look at in terms of Chris Strouser and his ability to develop offensive linemen, I think there's credit that needs to be given there. You have to wonder, Cody, if they were to go out and sign a guy like Cam Robinson, is Chris Strouser in a position to be able to develop him and sort of help him evolve into the left tackle that I think they think the Jaguars expected him to be. He hasn't been that for whatever reason, a variety of reasons. And with him being so young, and maybe not having a consistent season, or as consistent of a season that the Jaguars would have liked, he might not command such a high price tag, and that could work in the Colts' favor.
Oh, for sure. But you did mention, and we have to talk about it, defensive end. It's got to be the biggest need on this team. I mean, it still has to be, especially the defense. I mean, when you can't, we talked about it in the episode that we had just done. This one will come out after that episode, so you guys will know what we're talking about. But like, man, if you cannot rush for and get to the quarterback, you're going to blow leads. It's not going to look pretty. What happened last year? The Colts blew a lot of leads, a lot of leads, and they couldn't get to the passer when it mattered. I mean, Andrew, their leading sacker had 6.5 sacks on defensive end. That's not good enough.
No, not in the slightest. And if there's one knock on Chris Ballard as a general manager through his 5 years with the Colts, is that he struggled to draft defensive ends. And Kwity Paye had 4 sacks, made Pro Football Focus's and Pro Football Writers all rookie team. He played well, was an excellent run defender, and really showed up, I think, in moments as a pass rusher. The game against Jacksonville, the game against Buffalo, the game against San Francisco. I mean, he had his moments, and I think he's got a chance to be a really, really good player for this Colts team. Just from what we saw, I think he's well worth the first-round pick that the Colts invested in him. The numbers, again, from a production standpoint, might not have been there, but I think that can also be because I think the Colts asked too much of him. I think they drafted it when they drafted him. I think they expected him to come in and produce and get double-digit sacks and be this Dwight Freeney, Robert Mathis-esque force off the edge, and that is unrealistic for so many different reasons. And that's not an indictment on Paye himself, but that he's a rookie. You can't ask a rookie to come in and play that much of a role for your defense. Certainly not when you're running a very zone-heavy based scheme where it's predicated on you getting to the quarterback. If you give Trevor Lawrence enough time to make a sandwich and eat it, he's going to pick you apart. I mean, and that's exactly what happened on that first drive. What was he, 8 for 8, 3rd and 12? They give up 15 or 20 yards to, I don't even remember who. It doesn't matter. They gave it up. The Colts did. Their secondary did because their front four could not get home. And as great as DeForest Buckner and Grover Stewart have been, you cannot solely rely on those two to create pressure from the interior and expect that to be enough. You have to get consistent presence from the edge. Aquadim Muhammad is the other player I think you were talking about, had 6.5 sacks. And while that's good, it's not great. And you need somebody else that's maybe more proven, a veteran guy, to come in and help teach younger guys like Kwity Paye. Aquadim Muhammad is a nice player. I think he could potentially be back in a rotational role. But certainly as a starter, I mean, he's not good enough. I mean, that's just what it boils down to, and it really hurt the Colts this season, and they really need to invest on a veteran defensive end this offseason.
Oh, yeah. There's a lot of, I guess not a lot, but there's some guys that you could, and I think personally, Andrew, it's that important of a position, and I know you probably agree with me. Like, out of all these positions, this is the one I say, write a blank check to whoever. If you find one of these guys and you really want to improve your pass rush, you got to do that, man. You just have to invest where it matters. And it matters, man. It matters to get some pressure off the edge. I mean, you lost an Nico Autry last year. It bit you in the butt, So you got to make up for it here this offseason, I feel like. And guys like Von Miller, guys like Chandler Jones, even guys like Dante Fowler or Hassan Reddick. I mean, there's a couple guys here that they're a little bit older, except for Reddick. All these guys are over 30, but they're worth it, in my opinion. They are worth going after and getting a legit number one guy, getting an alpha there on your edge rush. I mean, we saw what Tennessee did. They invested heavily in getting pressure on the quarterback. They're one of the best teams last year at doing that. Colts need to take a similar approach. They need to bring in some guys that can actually provide some legit edge presence. They need to bring in somebody. And I don't typically say this, but like they need, I don't care what the price is, they got to bring in somebody.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, look at the two teams that are in the Super Bowl. The Bengals, the Rams. What's the common theme between both those teams? They both went all in for positions of need. Trey Hendrickson, DJ Reader, Sam Hubbard. Second-round pick Sam Hubbard. Free agent signing of DJ Reader. Free agent signing of Trey Hendrickson. 14.5 sacks. Aaron Donald. Enough said, right? But they went out and then they traded for Von Miller. They had Leonard Floyd. At one point, they signed him last offseason. They accumulated all of these pieces to go all in for a Super Bowl, to go all in to get to the ultimate goal of every NFL team, which is to win a Super Bowl. and they're there in large part because of the investments, pardon me, that they made at the positions of need. And for the Colts, defensive end is one of them. They have to invest. They have to go out and sign one of these veteran guys. I know we've talked about it already. You know, and hindsight's always 2020. But if you're a Colts fan, you know you're shaking your head at the fact that the Colts let Danico Autry walk out the door. And produce as well as he did for Tennessee. Justin Houston, same goes for Baltimore, had a very solid season for them as well. That simply cannot happen this next year. It just can't if you're the Colts.
It absolutely can't. Nope. You got to fix this. You got to fix this. You got to stop hoping that these guys are going to turn it around. Like, obviously, we feel pretty good about where Kwity Paye is right now, but that's not enough. You got to go make an investment here where it matters. And I think defensive end is that position where it definitely matters. Because if you can figure out your pass rush, like you mentioned in the last video, everything benefits from it. Your linebackers benefit from it. Your secondary benefits from it. So you got to go do something. You got to make a splash here. And I don't think it's a question of should you. I think it's who is it, like at this point for me. But the last position that we'll talk about here, Andrew, this is probably the position that not necessarily trying to find a starter, but trying to find maybe just some more depth. And that's the cornerback position. Maybe you can even lump the secondary just in general, maybe the safety position as well. But I think you got to certainly figure it out a little bit. You have some guys you like. I feel pretty comfortable saying who the starters would be for these two units, for the corner and the safety positions. But I guess the question is the depth right now in your secondary. What is your opinion on the secondary, and how do you think the Colts should look to potentially add some more depth here?
Yeah, I think it's important. Julian Blackman went down. They had George Odom step in for a few games, and he played well. And they also went out and signed Andrew Sendejo, which was a disaster, for lack of a better word. And, then you have Kari Willis, who missed a few games and was kind of off when he came back. And they had, I think, Jalil Ade come in and fill in for him at one point. My point being is that they got to a point, Cody, where they had to sign players off the street, off the free agency market. And you can't do that mid-season because they don't know your scheme. They don't, it's going to take some time for them to gain chemistry with the rest of the defense. And that's, rapport and chemistry is super important, clearly at any sport, but especially football, especially defensively. We've seen so many defenses break down, busts in coverage because they're not able to communicate at an effective level. So if you're Chris Ballard, you have to go out, in my opinion. You have to sign some depth at safety. I would bring back George Odom because he's been a key factor, a contributor for you on special teams as well as in the secondary. I think he's a solid backup. I would maybe invest a little bit more at strong safety in terms of a backup as well. Maybe you bring back Jalil Ade and give him a chance to compete. Excuse me. And then at corner, Rocky Sean, Isaiah Rodgers, as we mentioned earlier, stepped up in a major way. Credit to James Rowe, who's obviously now with Matt Eberflus in Chicago. He played a major part, I think, in them evolving and producing at the level that they did. Isaiah Rodgers contributed both special teams and in the secondary. Rocky Sin, despite not having any interceptions, played really well, gave him a really low passer rating. It got to a point where teams weren't targeting him. That's a credit, again, to James Rowe and the Colts secondary coaches. But we know that the Colts' entire defensive staff, for the most part, is going to look brand new. So we'll see how they are able to get the best out of these players moving forward. Xavier Rhodes, it was a 1-year deal for him this season. I think he's a little bit on the decline. I don't think he'll be back with the Colts this next season. I'd kind of be shocked at this point. And the Colts, I think, it would be in their best interest to invest in a veteran corner to pair alongside Rodgers, G.C., and others.
It seems like I was just kind of scrolling through some of the veteran guys. Seems like there's going to be a decent amount of vets out there that could really fill that Xavier Rhodes role, or maybe just be more of a backup, in case of emergency. So I definitely think the Colts should go the vet route, and maybe, who knows, maybe they even go sign a vet and then go draft a guy a little bit later. I wouldn't be opposed to that. But regardless, they need to figure it out here at both corner and safety, get some more guys in the building, or bring back some more guys. We'll see how that pans out. But guys, I think that'll do it for our look here of the positions of need for the Indianapolis Colts here. We talked about it. quite a bit, Andrew. And personally, I think that these are some moves the Colts need to make, undoubtedly. What are your thoughts, I guess, on all these? I guess, how would you rank these positions of need? That's my question.
That's a really good question. Number one, I'd go left tackle for the reasons I mentioned earlier. Number two, I'd go wide receiver. Number three, I'd go tight end. I guess I forgot defensive end was in there. My goodness. So let me go left. Let me go one left tackle, two defensive end, three wide receiver, four tight end, five secondary depth in terms of level of importance.
Mm-hmm. I'm right there. I have to go defensive end number one for me, though. I just think it's that important to get some guys there. At least one guy that just can change this defense. It's time to get a game changer at defensive end. I'm just kind of tired of not band-aiding it, but kind of just like almost punting to next year and hoping that these guys are going to develop. That's kind of what it felt like the Colts tried to do at defensive end a little bit last year and kind of banked on some guys who, like you said, weren't necessarily ready for that yet. So yeah, I'm ready for the Colts to just figure it out. Just bring in a guy, bring in a vet. So, all right, guys, that'll do it for this one. Thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you, Andrew, for coming on. Always a pleasure, my friend.
Of course.
And yeah, guys, if you like this video, let us know your thoughts on all the different positions that we talked about. And if you think the Colts need to address these things, and also what your number is for level of importance for all these positions. All right, guys, that'll do it for this one. Thank you so much for tuning in. And as always, go Colts.